Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we have some lessons that we have learned. Good lessons, hard lessons, and in between. In this video, we have me, Scott, we have Ty, we have Jeff, and we have Phil. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being here. We were kind of talking about video ideas, and we wanted to mention our actual lessons that we learned this year. Not like, oh, I picked up these cards because I learned this, but more so to the greater sports card market. And Phil, you mentioned a couple I would love for you to start with because I think they're great. One of which was referencing Bitcoin. So feel free to take it away and kind of give your first thought and lessons learned from 2024.
Yeah, sure. This is the 5-year Bitcoin chart. And we can see here, obviously, it's been on a ripper as of late. We thought, or we suspected, in this time frame, 2020, when it was ripping, as were cards, when the pandemic started at about, was that February 2020? You can see here, Bitcoin jumps from 13,000 all the way up to 59,000. And cards, a lot of cards in that time span, we know jumped as well, right? And then in this time period, 2021, that's when Bitcoin started to ease off a little bit and fall. So I think sports cards, particularly the ultra modern market, if you look at some of the indices that are out there and are not like Card Ladder and Market Movers, you can kind of pinpoint the peak of modern and ultra modern baseball at around March of 2021. And then it falls. And so did Bitcoin, right? And then what we saw in 2022 at around March was when the Fed started to increase rates, Fed funds rates. I think we saw 11 increases from 2022 to 2023. And then we saw Bitcoin continue to fall a little bit. And then it started to come back again this year. So right around, I'd say December of 2023, or January of 2024, that's when we saw Bitcoin completely separate itself from cards. This is the CL50 index from Card Ladder. Sorry, Ty. And you can see here exactly what I was mentioning. So the boom, this is the last 5 years, 2020, it goes up more than 3x, just like Bitcoin did. And then it comes back down. And then the Fed cycle starts to come down a little bit more. And then, hey, it didn't really rebound. I think we thought it might have. In January, we were talking about this when Bitcoin was at like 40,000 in January. And then it kind of came right back down. So Bitcoin is now, I don't know, like 20, 25x where it started. And cards are higher than they were 5 years ago, according to this index. Obviously, every index is going to be a little bit different, but they're not correlated, unfortunately. Bitcoin has some advantages over cards because, well, there are 21 million of them, which seems like a lot, but there's one coin that's right, the most popular one, the most respected, reputable coin. Maybe the other technologies are better. Maybe it's not always going to be number one, but it's perceived to be the gold equivalent to like with virtual assets or digital assets. And with cards, there are a lot of different ones, and it's confusing. And the market is a lot smaller with cards. Maybe there's 1 million collectors, and that's single cards. Maybe it's actually a lot smaller when you cut out and remove the people that are just in there for the wax. And opening wax, but with Bitcoin, it's a little bit different. It has some advantages for sure. So
I do think it's tough to compare the two things, to compare cards and then compare single Bitcoin. Like those are two completely different things, because of that reason you just said, Phil, which I'm glad you said. So you have a single Bitcoin, which is one thing, and then you have all these different cards. But actually, if you look at the card market overall and total sales volume in the card market, the correlation is much closer than just looking at an index of like the most iconic cards. So what I mean by that is just overall sales volume and sales dollars, while not as high as they were during the absolute fever pitch of COVID, it's much closer than what like those individual card prices represent right now. We've seen the number of cards in existence go up by about 50% in the last 5 years. The total number of cards just in 5 years. So much like our money supply, the number of cards has just grown exponentially relative to prior years' rates. So there is some interesting overlap. I do think back in 2020, 21, there was just a lot of hot money floating around into tons of things, NFTs, crypto, cards, sneakers, a lot of things were seeing surges that I think there was some overlap into that rationale as to why all those things were going then. But outside of it, I do think they're different in the sense that you have one thing that's more liquid with lower friction that you can go out and buy in crypto and in Bitcoin, as opposed to cards, which we keep seeing record sales for some cards, but the collective of cards, there's been like price compression down on many cards, but there's still a lot of money being pumped into the trading card industry overall. So I generally agree with what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing, but like I think there's a little bit of nuance that just says, you know, a lot of things have stabilized in card prices now, and there's actually a lot of money being put into cards in general, like just as much. I would argue there's probably more people than ever buying right now, genuinely interested in the cards, as opposed to just like the hot flip money that was back in 2021.
My thoughts on the matter. If I was going to park some money, like actual money, into something and have it as an investment, it would not be baseball cards. It would be Bitcoin. Between those two, right? And realistically, like the way with the president that is going to be in place and their stance on Bitcoin is a lot more pro than what the Biden administration was. And so because of that, there's a lot of hype around it. So Bitcoin could crash any second for anything. I don't think it will. I think there is enough evidence behind Bitcoin that it'll just come back up eventually. But like, again, we don't know. It's so speculative. And the more use cases that are implemented around like, okay, well, now more people are allowed to use it and it's an international currency and all these things if the dollar weakens. And there's a lot of things that can happen that can really make Bitcoin like explode to $1 million eventually, right? Like it could totally happen. And so because of that, like if I was going to have speculative investments, it would probably go towards Bitcoin, not sports cards at this point. But I like sports cards. And so I'm going to buy sports cards. And it is what it is. I'm not going to put new money into it. It's going to be all baseball card equity. Maybe that's part of the problem. I would and I will put new money into Bitcoin though. And that's something I've learned this last year too.
So, one thing to be aware of that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And I'm not a crypto expert. In fact,
me neither. So anything I said was like incoherent because I'm not an expert, but I feel like I know.
No. I'm just there's one thing that lurks in the back of my mind. Like the big benefit of crypto is supposed to be that it's independent, untraceable, secure, encrypted, unbreakable encryption is what we heard for many years. Well, now Google just launched their quantum chip, and from what I understand, like that type of computing technology could break Bitcoin's encryption in like a day or less. Like
that's concerning to me too.
you could literally have a scenario where you have all this money tied up into these digital coins that could be just hacked and stolen, like by new quantum, and not only that, but you could have listeners in the background that are actually surveilling, that have hacked into your wallet, but you still retain access, but they're monitoring. There's a lot of risk associated with it and a lot of unknown. Baseball cards have been around for over a century, and you can break in somebody's house and steal their cards, but they're physical paper, much like gold and silver. So there's like on that side of things too. I just think I'm not disagreeing. I know what you're saying, but I feel like there's a ton of risk in cryptocurrency personally. I'm a little wary of it, but
there's a reason I call them both speculative investments because they're both pretty risky. But I don't know. I see your thought process, Phil. Jeff, what do you think in the whole situation?
More fun to own baseball cards.
Yes, it is. I agree personally.
Yeah, I guess it depends if you're looking at it as a hobby or not. Risk in both areas. A couple lessons that I learned this year. One is that just because a card is a good deal, you don't have to buy it.
I struggle with that, Jeff.
It's hard because, especially with so many this year, I realized just how many different places there are to buy cards. So many different auction houses and sites. Every auction house has their own site, typically eBay. There's so many places to buy cards that it seems like you can always find deals. And for me specifically, my Achilles heel was like the PWCC auctions, or what's now Fanatics. And you could find some really good deals on there when auctions were ending, and you're like, well, I just got to buy it because it's a good deal. But I found myself picking up cards that I really didn't want. And then the cost it takes to actually go and sell those cards, once you take fees out, it makes it really an untenable situation. So I learned that it's still difficult for me because I see a card, especially if it's a card I know or have been following. if it's a good deal, it's just hard to turn away. But that's one lesson that I feel like I've learned this year, that you can just walk away.
Do I know a funny story about that?
Yep.
So I'm not a drinker. I don't drink much. But it's like I never have actually drunkenly bought anything, and I never will, hopefully, right? But whenever it's late and I'm in bed and there's these PWCC auctions, or sorry, Fanatics Live auctions ending, and I see last night I saw a Mookie Betts Black Topps Chrome Update PSA 9 out of 99, one of his coolest cards ever, and it was like $2,500. Like, man, that card should be worth more than $2,500. So I put a bid on there at $3,100. And I was like, why did I do that? I don't have the money ready unless I sell something I really like to buy that card. So I'm already like debating, like, should I reach out to Phil and see if he wants my Juan Soto blue at a cheap price because I'm an idiot and bought a card and I didn't want to sell it. And I'm debating this. And then luckily I lost by a bid, and I would have loved that card. It would have been fine. But I find myself in that situation too, where I need to think out some of the transactions because I know I have the cards to sell to cover $3,000, but I like those cards, and I have a thought process why I bought those and a time frame in my mind, and I don't want to ruin that for like the momentary satisfaction of winning an auction, which I do occasionally. So I agree. Anyone else struggle with that? Is that just me?
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
So happened last night.
Yeah.
It was pretty funny. So
almost every impulse buy bites me in the ass.
Yeah,
right.
Isn't that the truth?
Like,
though?
if I think about what I want to buy for a period of a month or two,
yeah,
and I don't have to actually like write out pros and cons, but I have to really give it some thought. Think about the counterpoints. How could this go wrong? Okay, now based on that, what's like the return upside realistically, and what's the risk? Always account for the risk, and there's a lot of risks in a lot of different forms. And I'm talking specifically like, you know, what player and what card you want of that player. The grade, that's kind of important too, but yeah. Impulse is can be dangerous in this game, and I'm sure a lot of our commenters can echo that.
Would you have been interested in my blue Juan Soto film, or would I have been screwed?
Yeah. I would be too.
Yeah.
Okay. At least I would have had an out.
I wish our audience had more of a direct line into the competitive scene behind the scenes amongst this group with some cards.
I sold my blue Mookie, Jeff.
You did?
I should have talked to you first. I think you were interested, but I didn't even think about it. I just sold it. Maybe you
Yeah.
were.
Well, that one I do have, so I can't.
That's true. You have a blue.
My
my
two biggest losses.
True Gem Plus, Jeff. I mean,
no, and I would say, well, do I have to buy it even though it's a good deal? I don't have to buy it just because it's a good deal.
Good job, Jeff. You're changing. Sorry for cutting you off, Ty.
My two biggest losses to date were both impulse buys.
One of them was the Gold Wander, right?
Yeah, one was a Gold Heritage Chrome Wander Franco that was ending on an auction, and I just thought this is at a weird time and it seems too low, and I just put in a bid and was like, if I get it for this, I'll be pretty happy, and felt like I could flip it on the vault, and it just everything went south for a million reasons for that.
In your defense on that one though, Ty, I think that would have been a really great play if he was.
It could have been, but it
process
still
battle.
bit me. And
exactly.
And then the other one was a Lamar Jackson Optic Hollow PSA 10 on our Discord a few years ago. Lamar was hot, and everybody was hot, and I bought this card. This guy posted it as like just, you know, for sale on one of the channels, and I was like, I'm gonna scoop this before somebody else does, because I felt like it was like $100 lower than it could have been. So I bought it, and then that was just a disaster. I wasn't even like actively looking to buy Lamar. I just got caught in the like post of the feed of like, hey, for sale. And I was like, sure, let's do it.
Terrible feeling.
So yeah. And that honestly dovetails into one of my big lessons this year, which is I don't know how to encapsulate it, but it's like be more methodical with my buying. I moved 7 times in 7 years. And moving a lot means you're putting all of your cards somewhat frantically at times into boxes just to get them from point A to point B, and then unpacking them. And so whatever organization I did have in the past quickly faded. And so I have, between organizing and putting up these shelves and doing all of these things, I have spent probably like 100 hours just sorting and organizing and comping cards that I had to sell and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And it's been a lot of work, and I'm amazed at how many cards I picked up over time that just, I'm like, why did I really buy this? Yeah, it's cool, but it wasn't like in the top echelon of cards that I won. And by top echelon, I don't mean the most expensive. I just mean kind of having like a mental awareness about what cards you really want the most and staying focused on those instead of like picking up something gimmicky that's you're like, oh, that's a pretty cool card. I'm going to get that. And then you suddenly have a whole box of them and then you're taking a loss on it because you're going to pay fees or whatever else, even if it stayed flat. So
Yeah.
that's kind of been my big like lesson this year. And that I really like to display my cards. That's been another like thing that's been nailed down for me this year is I really like to see my cards around me and not have them in boxes where I don't see them.
Okay. One lesson I learned this year is on-field performance. We knew this, but it's true. On-field performance does not always translate to card values, at least positive on-field performance. There's players who can have a good year and their cards are flat or down. And so it's one of those things where be careful when you're being speculative on short-term flips. And I feel like Phil, that's a tongue twister we could make probably. I feel like Phil has mentioned this before, but I feel like we all have to learn it in our own time, in our own way. I don't have like a big example of this happening to me, like in particular, but a lot of players, I was like, man, his cards have to be way up, and they just aren't way up, right? They're the same. And so who's a good example? Some of the Soto cards, right? Some of like the Gatorade Bath autos. So like the Gatorade Bath PSA 10s and so forth. Like they haven't moved. Will they ever move? I don't feel as confident, right? In short term. So it's one of the situations.
Yeah. Some people are thinking that maybe there are too many PSA 10s.
Yeah.
The Gatorade. It's just not that special. They're always up for sale. Riley Green would be an example where like performance,
Yeah,
all cards,
there's a good example.
are pretty much flat. And I know Teapot's talked about this and he's a little bit bewildered about it. And rightfully so. He's just at that level. If he got his WAR like one full point higher, and then the hobby would
Kyle Tucker, right?
Maybe
Is
that's
Kyle Tucker's card's going to go up now that he's in Chicago.
Maybe
his Superfractor auto just over 40K, so he's doing okay. At least that card is.
Yeah, that one card.
But yeah, the rest of his stuff probably not so much. So one of my lessons has to do with Bowman Draft. We talked about this in a recent episode, how 2024 Bowman Draft is not being opened by breaking groups at the rate that it usually is. And my point here is, I think last year I buy a lot of wax because I have a business where I have to sell wax to people, basically. And last year, my lesson would have been wax. It's inventory more than it is an investment. And this year, having seen what I've seen over the last few years, fluctuations on all of my wax products, Bowman Draft was the last release where each year it was a solid 1 year hold. Maybe for 3, 4, 5 years out, it's a different story because we know a little bit more about the prospects. But Bowman Draft, in my opinion, was always priced right by Topps. It always had enough of a floor. There was always enough of a hype cycle. It would last weeks. With a lot of products, it lasts a week and a half, and then it's the next product. With Bowman Draft, you have a big core of prospect collectors where literally nothing can cannibalize it except for another Bowman product, and not Sapphire. I'm talking like Bowman Baseball, which comes out usually in April or May. So there's enough of a window for breakers to need Bowman Draft. And the quickest way for a product to increase in price is for more of it to get opened, because then the supply is lower. And Bowman Draft does get opened, and it does, particularly by breakers and by folks that are just looking to, scratch an itch or whatever, or collectors, set builders, maybe even. It's not that popular of a set builder set. But this year, the combination of the class not being as perceived to be as good, the number one pick, second baseman, doesn't fit the mold of like a Jackson Holiday, where can this guy really be like a hobby darling? Probably not. Jack Caglione, a number of flaws. And then after that, there's just not a lot of guys that have shown they can do it yet. In minor league experience, it's just the minor league stats just aren't that good. And then the price being higher than last year, which was higher than the year before. No lottery ticket this year. And they printed a little bit more of it. And they've got a new SKU with HDAs. So And then you've also got maybe a little bit of distraction from Topps Chrome Update, even though the market's a little bit different for that product. So just a combination of things, and Bowman Draft is down quite a bit, and they're having a hard time selling it. So I've got a personal Fanatics rep, by the way.
Nice.
Which isn't, it seems like it's pretty cool. It's almost like the best thing about it is I can tell other people I have it, because the guy reaches out to me when stuff's not selling. So I take it as data points. I don't respond to him. And hopefully there's no way he's listening to this. But and the funny thing is, like, he offers me stuff that I can find cheaper on Topps' website, like that same time, and never mind the sales tax difference. But yeah, let's just say that very few times has he reached out to people 6-7 days after the product's release day saying he still has it at near release day pricing. And that's when you know, like, all right, stay away from this one.
Mm-hmm.
So Bowman Draft is not infallible is the lesson.
Bowman, it's an interesting product, interesting world. I feel like it's kind of has it been ruined? Would you think it can bounce back, Phil? Think it could be back to the mid 2010s? I just feel like it's too expensive to be what it was.
I don't think it's ruined. I actually think right now there's maybe too much negativity about it.
Okay.
I
So
think
getting
I think,
to
well, I
a
think
price
this
point where it's a deal.
This release, particularly the dealer-to-dealer market, people have been able to buy jumbo boxes, the old jumbo, which is the new hobby, the 3 auto version. Some people have bought boxes for like $408 or $412. So that's looking pretty juicy, and that means that secondary market's probably around $450 right now. I'm not saying it doesn't get any lower. And the thing is, like, it could be March before these prices turn around. So last year's Bowman Draft, it was flat at around like $525, $550 till March 1st or whatever. Then it started to go up. And that wasn't related to performance. I think just supply was low. I don't think that had to do with Paul Skeens. Like, oh, he's dating Livy Dunn. No, we already knew that. So I don't know, man.
Okay. That's me.
I don't think the Bowman brand's broken, though, if that's where you're going. Like, I think it's still fine. It's
maybe we do an
they're going to learn their lesson.
We'll do an episode on like 5 things we can do to fix Bowman, right? And then we can fix it. Because I think it isn't broken, but like, how can we improve it? One of my things is that is this a lesson learned? It's also an accomplishment. I don't know if it's a negative thing. It's kind of all in between, but it's lesson learned is don't be afraid to move on from cards. I typically will consolidate. I'll sell cards I never thought I will. But this year I took it to a whole nother extreme and really changed my entire collection. And I sold cards that I thought I would never sell. And there's maybe like one I kind of miss. It just works out where you don't really miss them. You get better cards. It gives you more opportunity to buy better things. Like, don't be afraid to consolidate. And we should talk about consolidation in one of these videos and if it's good or bad, because I've seen some people say it's negative, but like, I can't afford just to keep buying these cards. I have to sell to buy the cards. So if you're independent wealthy, it's a bad idea. But for me, it's been a lesson I've learned is have a few cards that you know you never would want to move. Be okay with never moving those. And then just hunt and look for cards you enjoy more. And don't be afraid to move out of other cards and all that good stuff. So that's a big one I learned this year.
Yeah, I've got one more short one. It's similar. It's if there is a card you want, though, and you're close to making a deal, but you're just not getting the value or the price that you think you should be getting, that it's good to walk away.
Sure.
And because that happened several times with Chris and I this year. And I'd say more than a handful of times, then the person ended up coming back and we ended up reaching a deal at a lower price. So a lot of times you just get too eager to have the card and pay more than you're comfortable paying or more than you think you should pay. And then that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So I just feel like I learned this year that you can walk away, and if it's meant to be, it'll come back around. They'll reach out to you, the seller will, and you'll find a deal. Otherwise, you just can move on to other things. So
a good example of that, I just said I don't miss a lot of the cards I sell, right? The same thing can be said about the card. If you lose, it's okay because you probably won't miss it that much. It's the same thought process. There's always another card to grab your attention. So don't be afraid to miss. I missed on the Paul Goldschmidt Bowman Chrome Super autograph that I really wanted. I was going to go to the Kyle Tucker pricing and I lost, which I was surprised about. And it turned out fine. It gave me more money to buy other cards that are probably better, and so like don't get too caught up. Any other final thoughts before we wrap this episode up?
On the Bitcoin remarks, don't buy Bitcoin right now unless you seriously do your research yourself. We're not financial advisors. We don't understand your risk tolerance. And I think it just went up like 50% in a month, something like that. So might not be the best time to buy it, or open your initial position of it if you don't already own it. Yeah.
I'm not going to give Bitcoin advice because I own $0 of Bitcoin. But with that being said,
quantity is the number one benefit. If we bury the lead there, and I think Ty got to that when he talked about the increase of cards over time.
Yeah, and speaking of like supercomputers solving the algorithms to get mined Bitcoins faster, we're basically at like all Bitcoins are almost all the way mined. So like we're good there. But it is a concern, Ty. But like the advice I got in Bitcoin that I should have followed but didn't because I didn't have expended like extra money I wanted to spend in Bitcoin is like spend like $20 a day. So that way you're going up and going down and not really getting caught up in all the highs and lows. And be okay with it. Roll with it.
Yeah, Coinbase has something where you can do like a buy every week or month or whatever, So the transaction costs with Bitcoin kind of suck. That's the issue. But
who owns Bitcoin here? Just you, Phil?
I have it in like a larger fund, like a larger crypto fund.
Part of a portfolio.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got the ETF, maybe one of the ETFs.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay.
Got to watch out for that quantum chip.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Way too much. Oh, one more thought. Last thought for me. If I had to buy a product to invest in, sealed, I'm taking Pokemon over sports cards. Okay. That's all my thoughts. Dead serious.
Agreed.
Dead serious. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you later.